Welcome to Podcasting Smarter, the podcast for podcasters by podcasters. Podcasting Smarter is the official podcast from Podbean, featuring podcasting interviews, best practices, and helpful tips. We're here to give you the tools, resources, product updates, and news to help you get started podcasting and keep your podcast growing.
Hello, and welcome. We are so excited that you're joining us here today. This is our back to school special. Oh my gosh. Today we're joined by Tom Rogers, who is the visionary founder of Teachers Talk Radio. I'm going to intro him in a second. We are so excited. Pop your questions in the chat. The team is here to answer them. And we're just so excited to talk about education and podcasting, especially this time of year, and to talk to Tom about building Teachers Talk Radio, which is a really, really incredible podcasting a podcasting venture. So I'm so excited that you're here, Tom. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
I'm just thrilled. Great to be here. And you're what is it? First time caller, long time listener.
I have been watching the Podbean Smarter podcast with many of the people who will be watching this avidly. I'm an avid viewer of Podcasting Smarter. Now, you'll have to tell me, is Podcasting Smarter video and audio or just video? Or is it both?
So it's the podcast is called Podcasting Smarter. And then also a lot of our events are Podcasting Smarter brand because they're, under that Podcasting Smarter umbrella of tips and best practices and tools for all of our podcasters. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm going to read our brief intro and then we will get started. I'm so excited to chat with you about Teachers Talk Radio. Welcome back, everyone, to Podcasting Smarter and our August live event, Podcasting Success, a back-to-school special with Teachers Talk Radio. Today, we're joined by Tom Rogers, the visionary founder of Teachers Talk Radio. Tom is not only an experienced history teacher, but also a pioneering educator who's transformed the way we engage with educational content. With a career spanning over a decade, Tom has taught in various countries, including England, Wales, Spain, and Slovenia. His diverse teaching background, combined with his leadership roles as head of department, assistant head teacher, has equipped him with unique insights and strategies that he now shares through his podcasting platform. So Teachers Talk Radio was born out of Tom's passion for education and his desire to create a community where educators can share their experiences, challenges, and successes. So for everybody out there who's looking at how to create community for their podcast and to really connect within their niche, this is such a great event for you here today. Since its inception, Teachers Talk Radio has grown into a really thriving hub for teachers, offering valuable discussions and a really wide range of topics for today's educators and educational landscape. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, Podcasting Smarter has live stream sessions just like this one with top podcasters and industry experts. We also have exclusive recorded episodes on the Podcasting Smarter podcast, so make sure to check those out. I know that, Tom, you mentioned you have. And this is just one of our live events, and we've got some really fun opportunities for you to join our community. Podcasting Smarter is brought to you by Podbean. We're a podcast hosting and a monetizing platform and home to over 640,000 podcasts. To start your podcast, head over to podbean.com today. And now we will get started. How's it going, Tom?
Good, thank you. How are you today? You okay?
I'm great. I'm so excited to chat with you. So first off, we're going to share a clip. We're going to talk all about, how you built Teachers Talk Radio and, the educational side of podcasting, which I think for everybody out there, maybe who's a parent or, works with kids or is an educator, it's really their niche and especially for back to school. But first off, tell us a little bit about the story behind Teachers Talk Radio and how you started it.
Well, I started it in my bedroom with a laptop and a mic. It was literally just an idea that I had in 2021. It was during, obviously, the pandemic. I was sort of just very sort of confined during that period. And I there's some reasons behind it. So number one is this idea of having live content. So all of Teachers Talk Radio content is live. A lot of it we do through Podbean Live. Some of it we do through YouTube and through other engines. But the whole idea was it was going to be like Teachers Talk Radio. So it was going to be a little bit like old school on, internet radio. then we would make all of our live content available on demand as a podcast or through any other means of that sort. So that was one driver, this idea of having live content. The other thing that drove it was the concept of giving teachers a voice and a platform, because actually what I was frustrated with, and I still am to an extent, is the number of sort of events and podcasts and things, organizations with teacher in the name, but no actual teachers on them. So if you're going to start a venture with teacher in the name, the Teachers Podcast, have some teachers on it who actually teach children on a semi-regular basis. So one of my goals and objectives from starting Teachers Talk Radio was to get more teachers talking and more people listening to teachers talking, to give that platform for the profession and people to connect in that way. And in terms of starting it up, it was also just because it was fun. I like coming up with fun ideas. And I was going to say I like the sound of my own voice. No, I don't. I'm a teacher. Of course, I don't like the sound of my own voice. But I think one of the reasons is it was fun. I like media. I like sort of the idea and concept of podcasting and making something media related. So a lot of what we do is actually topical and news related. Our content's coming out every day, so we're trying to stay on top of things that are happening in education. That's sort of a roundabout summary, but there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to hear more about kind of the nuance of it and the different, ways people can listen. But the first thing that you said, I thought that was really interesting is that you use Podbean Live. So for everybody out there, it's not something we talk about so much because at Podbean, we have so many features, and built into the platform. So we actually do have live streaming built in, and it's free, right, to use. It's built into the app, the Podbean app. You can utilize it from your phone. It's actually really high quality. So what's great about it is that anybody can join from anywhere in the world. The only reason we don't use it for our live events is because we want video, but it's some of the best audio quality that, you can get. And so tell us a little bit first, because I want to talk about, kind of unpack more of what you said, but what has your experience been using Podbean Live? Because we don't talk about it that much. It's one of those things where, we're so busy talking about AI now, because I'm obsessed with AI. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think so. When I first started this, as I said, in early 2021, I was looking for a platform where you could produce live radio, audio only content, and where you could embed a live player into the website, where somebody could potentially click play and then they could listen to something that was actually live. And, investigating all the different options, Podbean seemed the best one. And I think there's the big positives of it are audio quality, as you say, is very high because people are calling in from their phones. And more often than not, if somebody has an iPhone or any sort of smartphone, the microphones on those are very, very good. There are some technical issues with calling in on Podbean Live. So we tell all of our guests that they have to wear headphones if they
Yes.
call in from a mobile phone. Otherwise, you get weird echoey sounds. You have to be aware of how to use the platform in terms of if people call in, you get a flash up on screen, guest calling in. The thing that we've liked about it, that I like about it, is you do get random people from all around the world listening in. We have listeners from the sort of rural Iran who listen to us regularly on Podbean Live. We have people who listen to us from villages in the Congo who listen to Teachers Talk Radio. I mean, that's pretty cool. Some of them are there to engage with education and learn English. Some of them are just there because they're curious and they've seen Teachers Talk Radio and they tune in. But I think that's quite cool. We've had people obviously in the US and various other places. So that's been one nice thing about it. And I just think it's quite simple in the sense of, you go live, you're live, it's audio only. A lot of people don't want to appear on video. Norman Jean, you're an expert. You do it all the time. Probably do it more than Trump or Kamala. You're on video. But some people don't like it. So actually, the audio only option on Podbean Live was a pretty cool thing. And yeah, and we've been using it. We have shows every single day. So we schedule the shows in on Podbean Live, and they go out live. And then they're available as podcasts. I mean, the nice thing about Podbean Live is you can literally take the live and then click publish on the podcast. Now, what we tend to do is we have within Teachers Talk Radio some quality assurance. So between the live and the published podcast, we obviously listen to it. We do any edits that are needed. We've got an amazing team on that. Shout out to Paul Hazard if he's listening, and Graham and James, who do some of the editing with me on the podcast. But before it goes out as a podcast, we try to do some editing on it. But with it being a live product, sometimes there's just things you can't edit, as it would be in live TV or whatever it would be.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the great things about live. You never kind of know what's going to happen, and it has that really energetic feeling.
Yes.
And we actually started our events doing them on Podbean Live, but then we realized people want to see our faces. So
well, that's
we
why
love it.
We do use, as I say, we stream through YouTube. So we've got 3 or 4 regular video shows now that are also live, but we do them through YouTube and through X and other platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I just love what you said in terms of using it. I think for everybody out there who's hosted with Podbean, it's free, right? You can try it out. And what's great is, we're not here to talk about Podbean Live, but I just want to nerd out for a second because like it's cool. It's one of those things where it will record your podcast, so you can save the live, you can download it, edit it, or if you're like, I'm happy it's a live show, you can just literally publish it from the back end of your account. So it's a really cool tool for anybody out there, because we have so many tools built in at Podbean and we don't always get to talk about all of them, Podbean Live specifically being one of them. So that's a really fun thing to hear.
The other thing is you can broadcast from your mobile phone. So actually, if you have zero budget, you could actually record through Podbean Live through your mobile phone, potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you can record using the unlisted feature. Honestly, sky's the limit. We love it so much, and it's so nice to get that feedback because it's one of those features where we love talking about all our features of Podbean. It's nice to hear that about Podbean Live. I think it's something where also, if you've never podcasted before, you're going to feel like, oh no, people can hear me. And I'm sure as a teacher having to present in front of students. So in terms of being able to, have that confidence in terms of, speaking on a podcast, and obviously you've presented in front of the classroom, you guys also have a plethora of hosts. You have so many hosts that work with you through several different verticals. So tell us a little bit about the nuances there, because Teachers Talk Radio isn't just like one channel, one host. Tell us a little bit about kind of the nuance there, which I think everybody wants to hear about.
Yeah, so we have upwards of 35 hosts at TTR, or hosts and contributors, and most of them have their own shows on Teachers Talk Radio. So they have their own time slot and they go live and they have their own format and guests. There's certain things that you can expect across all TTR shows, in terms of how they're structured and the content, but each host has their own individual style. We're always on the lookout for teacher hosts, by the way. So one of our big things is we aim to have 80% or more of our hosts who are current teachers or leaders in 3 to 19 schools or educational institutions. So we try to really keep it authentic and grounded in professional practice. Like, I still teach part-time myself, but actually all of our hosts, as I say, we try to keep to that 80% or more. And it's the same thing with guests. Anybody can be a guest on TTR, absolutely anybody can call in, anybody can get involved, but we are always, of course, looking for teacher and leader guests as well, to come on and actually share their day-to-day experiences. And I think that's what is unique and authentic about us, is that teacher voice. So lots of hosts from lots of different backgrounds, lots of different types of schools: primary, secondary, early years, nursery, further education, higher education. There's lots of different hosts there from lots of different contexts. International education, we have hosts in Dubai, in Mexico City. We have hosts from all over, really, and we've had hosts from all over the world, Australia and lots of other places. We've got Jamie Clark now actually hosting from Australia. So we have a whole range of hosts there. And yeah, I think that gives us that diversity of content, gives us an appeal to lots of different groups. And I think it also gives a sense of community. You know, we use Slack. So obviously the fact is a bit like if you had a podcast network, I guess you can all chat with each other. You can all talk with each other. You could DM each other, you know, through Slack. So we use that, and that works really nicely just to keep everyone's busy, but at least you've got a bit of connection there through that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like, there's a real community aspect. I want to talk next in terms of the kind of content, because we're in a back to school moment, and in the US, or at least for a lot of schools that start in the fall, what are some of the topics that your hosts are bringing up this time of year? And, what are things that teachers and parents and students should look out for in terms of trends and some of the content that you guys are sharing honestly, across the world? Because it's something where you probably have a bit of an eagle's eye view, right?
Yeah.
Because there's so many different hosts, and obviously the live audience, the feedback you're getting from the podcast, all of that as well.
Yeah, I mean, education podcasting has expanded and grown massively in the last few years anyway. You know, in the last 5 years, there's just so many more sort of podcasts out there. I think some of the topics that really sort of resonate are on behavior. I think behavior is a huge issue in schools at the moment. I think anything around student behavior or how to manage behavior has always been a real sort of trending topic that people want to hear more about, particularly obviously teachers. I think AI, we mentioned it, AI, even within education, is a huge growing topic, a huge source of both excitement and also in some quarters worry about what AI is going to do, like replacing Tom Rogers with a ginger robot. Um, but essentially, you know, there is excitement, there is nerves as well, but also there's thinking about the possibilities of AI in the classroom. So I think that's definitely a trending topic. I think curriculum is always of interest in terms of what's being taught and why it's being taught. So I'd say if I was to say three, I think they would be three, I would say, big topics that have generated a lot of interest in the last year or two on TTR. The challenge was starting obviously with pretty much next to nothing budget. And you know, and I think
Yeah.
you made a good point actually, and it was one of the ones I watched with you in, and you were saying that, you know, podcasters don't want to listen to they never want to listen to their first episode
No,
back, and
never.
they don't want to, but equally, you've also said, which I agree with, that you have to make a start somewhere, because although if you're searching for perfection from the word go, you either might not have the budget or the time
Yeah.
or the inclination. And actually, one show or episode is never going to be the same as the next one. You're never going to reach like a plateau. You're like, that's amazing, that's amazing, that's amazing. There's always going to be one that's not as good as another one. You know, like that's just a fact of life. So I think one of the biggest challenges was expectations and trying to work within the budget areas that you've got and what you can do. I think one of the other challenges is obviously navigating the fact it's live. So there's going to be technical things that you have to navigate and negotiate all the time. You have to listen. It's not like recording it and editing it. If it's live, someone's got to be there really to be there if something goes wrong, or to administrate, or to help on social media to try and generate some interest around the content. So I think that's a challenge. I think promoting is a challenge. I think that there is such a massive growth in the number of podcasts and outlets out there that the choice for people to listen to, I think Podbean has what, 690,000 or something on it, just on Podbean. So, you know, like that
Yeah,
eco
640. Yeah, 1,000
640.
podcasts.
There you go. So like the number of podcasts out there is like astronomical. So how are you going to compete for people's attention and produce content that's actually interesting for people to listen to? So that's something I've always got in mind, is like the listener thinking, what do I want to listen to right now? What would actually interest me and make me want to listen? Rather than just producing content because it's fun, even though it is fun. I think it's good to have the listener in mind all the time, about what they will find interesting. So I think there's some of the challenges anyway. There's been many, but there's some.
And I would also think, coming on for a 3 hour show or, an hour show, anything like that, just different personalities, time zones, topics, all of that, I think is a lot. Um, and I want to talk next about strategies for growth, also engaging with that listener base and with the community you've built. You mentioned the live and Podbean Live, this is, we're really not here to talk about this today, folks.
Mm.
But Podbean Live is, people can comment in real time. They can jump in, join the conversation like we're here today, but it's, on a regular show for your podcast. So that's a really fun feature in terms of engagement. But what strategies have you found the most effective?
Well, I mean, the obvious ones are through social media, and we use Headliner, we clip things, we put quotes out from shows. So with them being live, we obviously do a lot of live tweeting or posting, as it's now called. We do a lot of that. We do a lot of quoting of guests on topics to try and promote the show. We sometimes make graphics cards with those quotes on to try and sort of engage people that way. But I think headliner clips have been great. We've used a lot of that, just audio only with the text over. We've created templates that are branded, so we use those. But also just engaging with people on social media, the usual things like tagging people on social media. I mean, that's one of the things we also post across lots of different social media platforms. So we cross post using scheduling software. So we cross post across X, LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok, Threads, YouTube, so we get across as many platforms as we can. I mean, to be fair, you can only, as much as everyone says that, you can only really have in my opinion, really build one or two in a way that is properly like quality, because you've really got to put thinking into it. You can't just like bump out a load of garbage. So I'd say our top two are probably X and LinkedIn. Are the two that we would use the most. I mean, LinkedIn is a great platform, in my opinion, for not only networking, but promoting things like podcasts. But X is also very good because it's topical, it's in the moment. Threads has appeared, I guess, as a rival to X, but we've started using that. But X is our main thing. So I think social media, I think word of mouth helps. We've been to shows, we've been to the Bet Show, we've been to the Education Show, we've been to lots of events, and as many sort of events as we can, just to sort of talk about what we're doing and hopefully help teachers in the process. Because if there's something on there that they feel can help them, then that's really a core part of our mission of why it all started.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love what you said. First off, shout out to Headliner and our friends at Headliner. So, yeah, they're definitely fantastic and they've got a lot of tools. So we're definitely friends with them. Shout out to our friends there. And, I love what you said in terms of scheduling posts. What platform do you use? What's
we use Zoho.
Zoho. Okay. For everybody out there, that's what Teacher Talk Radio is using. I always like to dig in and ask all those questions because I think it's something where, if you're thinking, oh, I don't necessarily have time to be on all these platforms at all the certain times I want to post. How do other people do it? You can schedule these things in advance using third-party platforms. So Zoho is one of them. That's a really good one. Really good tip. And it sounds like also, there's a lot of different content that you're creating, right? There's a lot of different voices, a lot of different topics. And so it's something where, I find that maybe also with the amount of diversity in terms of the teachers and the hosts and the topics, are you finding that you check a lot of different boxes because of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we always direct people on the web, on our website. We have and the Podbean, I don't know if it's actually Podbean who produced this. I think it is, but basically we use Wix for our website, and you can actually import. It's almost like a directory of your podcast. So on our listen back page, if you visit our website, go to listen back, you can actually search for any name or topic in there using the search box, and then it'll actually come up. So if you search like behavior, it'll come up with just the shows that mention behavior. If you mention a show with my name in it, it will just bring you up any show where I hosted it. Any guests. So we always say you can search anybody in education and they'll probably be in there somewhere, because we've got over, we've got 1,000 shows or whatever it is. So, there's something for everyone in there, and the search tool is quite handy for that on the website. So that's
Yeah. No, that's really important. I think for everybody out there, make sure that your website's optimized for your podcast, right? At Podbean, we have templates built in that you can utilize. You can also embed your podcast into third-party websites. There's a lot of flexibility there, but you want people to be able to find it and listen. So sometimes, if they're maybe on their computer and they want to listen outside of necessarily like a directory, that would be an app to listen to podcasts. They have the ability to do that via your website and check out, search any specific topic, which I think is really great as well.
Norma Jean, can I ask you a question about your
Oh, that's a first. Sure. Why not?
I want to know, what podcast do you listen to? What's your
Oh
like
gosh, we'll get to that at the end. We'll get to that
okay,
at the end. Don't
tell me, because
worry.
I
We've
want to know
got
what
lots
you
more
listen
teacher
to.
talk radio to talk about. I want to talk to you next about, we'll get to mine later, but I want to talk to you next about, how the different teachers select topics, right? Because you've got
Yeah.
a really diverse hosting
Yeah.
community, right? It really is a community. Like you said, you've got a Slack going. I'm sure everybody's popping in the comments, and is there, do you see that, because obviously you have a bit of a bird's eye view, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, but do you see trends? Do you see a lot of cultural influence? Do you see a lot of experiential firsthand experience that teachers want to talk about and share? What are the ways that because it's not, just one podcast, one host, it's really a community endeavor in that way. What are some ways that the topics are selected, and and it sounds like obviously they're providing value, and we have a clip to play for everybody in a second, but um what, how has that factored into the kind of content that's coming out of TTR, Teachers Talk Radio?
Yeah, I mean, the topics are completely up to individual hosts to choose, but I think what we try to do is create things that are teacher centric, that teachers will be interested in listening to. We have stuff as diverse of somebody talking about the history of the Paris Olympic Games for a show, all the way through to, something that happened in their school last week. That they wanted to talk about, without naming the school, of course. But I think the diversity of topics is massive. I think the volume of content we put out means it is going to be massive. There's no caps in terms of what we say to hosts in terms of don't cover that top, like they can cover within that education teaching sphere whatever they want, really, whatever they're passionate about, because I think that's just absolutely key. If somebody is really interested in something, passionate and knowledgeable about it, that will come through, and then that will generate. Whereas if it's just something generic that someone's gone, oh, I'll talk about whatever, and then it doesn't really come across. So I think that's having that passion for the topic, and that's the advantage of having the community we have, all the different hosts we have, in that everyone's going to have their own thing. Whereas if it's just one host or two hosts, they are going to be a bit limited, aren't they? In terms of, one person's not going to be interested in everything. So we do have people who, like thinking off the top of my head, like James Radburn, we have, who's into digital. So a lot of his shows are about computing and digital skills and tools. We have people who maybe are more into inclusion or special educational needs, like Marie, or, I'm just picking names off the top of my head and thinking we have hosts who cover a lot of different things. So that is where we're getting that diversity in. But in terms of choosing the topics, that's really up to hosts. But we do say, what is happening at the moment? What's actually going to appeal to listeners? What do they want to listen to? We mentioned some of the trending topics earlier. But it's not just that. It can be something so niche that actually generates interest. Niche things can actually work really well. The other thing that, I guess this is sort of linked but not, is with us doing live, we don't. I'd love to talk to you at the end about podcast downloads because we do live as well. So it's interesting, isn't it? Like someone would say, "What are your podcast downloads?" And someone might say, "Well, ours are 1.1 million." But let's say we got 1.1 million, but no one ever says how many live unique listeners have you got. You know, maybe because they think as a podcast it can't be a live podcast. But I think it's good to look at all the metrics in terms of that. So just coming back to the topic, some topics have surprised us in terms of the interaction live with people. You know, and often it's topical things. It's things that have just happened. So
give us some examples.
Well, I did. So I'll give you an example. We did a show. I mean, even the show that I did last night on it was quite niche. It was on like an alternative pension plan for teachers, and it's quite controversial. The unions don't like it. So then suddenly you have people from the union saying we don't like it. You have other people saying this is great, give people choice. And it generated a really lively discussion, really good guests. We had the CEO of the academy chain who were proposing the pension schemes, United Learning. And then we also had an ex-union boss, Kevin Courtney, on the other side. So we had a really good, I think debates work really well anyway. But also that sort of conversation about something maybe a bit controversial and hearing different people's views. So that's an example. That's quite a niche topic that did quite well in terms of people listening.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things where I think for everybody out there, you're thinking, oh my gosh, like teachers' pensions, right? And that's probably even more niche because it's one country specific or Commonwealth specific,
Yes.
right? And also for everybody out there who's listening, if you're American, when people from the Commonwealth say scheme, they don't mean like a trickery thing. That's just the name for a plan.
It could be.
Right. But generally, when people
not.
say scheme, they mean like the program, right?
Yeah.
Versus in America, when you say scheme, it's like, what kind of scheme are you up to? So definitely important to remember. But I think it's also one of those things where for podcasters, it's like you want to make sure that, you reach your audience and that you don't bore them and whatever, but also like pensions are important. And how many podcasts out there are existing about teachers' pensions, right? And if you're a teacher and you're thinking, oh gosh, I do have a pension, I got to figure that out. It's vitally important, right? And to have things accessible and put together in a way where you can hear the experts and you're excited and it's offering value in a way where you can engage with the content on a really important topic, that's huge. And so I think that is something where for every podcaster out there, if you're thinking like, okay, how niche can I go? Think teacher pension funds. I think that's a really great litmus test, definitely. To when you think about it as well. And I want to ask you next, for anybody out there who's an educator, who's maybe a teacher or working in administration or anything like that, who's thinking about starting their own podcast, their own maybe even podcast network, what advice would you give them? Because I know this has been a bit of a journey for you. You started in that big COVID moment, right? Where everything shut down and everybody was like, oh gosh, what kind of creative project should I launch? What kind of like what kind of podcast can I
I'm really
have?
depressed. I need to do something with my time. Yeah.
No, but there was a lot of creativity that actually came out of a really challenging time. So,
Yeah.
I think that you did something great with it. And so for everybody out there who's thinking about, okay, well, how can I start a podcast? Or, I'm a teacher, but I'm thinking about how to utilize podcasting in education or even in the classroom. What's some advice that you can offer?
I think the first thing is just go for it and go for the idea and just have a go at it and do it in the way that you want to do it and that you're comfortable with, even if it's bite size or if it's long form, whatever it is. I think the second one would be consistency. Do you know what? I think that's the biggest one. I think so many people start podcasts and they go, this is just a podcast. This is easy. I'm just going to record this and then ping it out. And then I think when people don't get anything back from it after a couple, as in they don't get loads of people going, oh, I've just listened to your podcast, right? This is the thing I was thinking is, and you tell me if I'm wrong on this, is when I listen to a podcast, I don't immediately finish it and think I'm going to email the creator of that podcast to tell them about the episode I've just listened to. You know, you probably didn't know that I listened to Podcasting Smarter until like a
No,
few
I
weeks ago.
didn't. I was very pleasantly surprised. I mean, we have a lot of listeners, but you never know who they are.
This is my point. So as a new podcaster, if you're not getting any, because you're new anyway, so you're not going to have that listener list anyway. So when you're going, who are the listeners? Where are they? It's social media is different. You get a like and you can see who liked it. With a podcast download, it's faceless, and people might not even want you to know that they listen to your podcast, right? Because they just don't want to, they just want to stay private, and it's their little thing. They put their headphones on, they go into they zone out there. So I think consistency and not giving up in that first 5 to 10 episodes would be sort of a bit of advice. Like, just keep plugging away, keep the consistency going. I do think that audio quality does matter. I do think it's better to just start when you can start, but then to really start thinking as soon as possible about audio quality. And sometimes like that can be difficult, because if you've got guests from all over the shop, you know, sometimes that just is not possible to have the audio quality you want on every thing that you do. And I would rather have a really interesting, quality, authentic thing happening that didn't have top-notch audio than not have it. So like, I just go for it and get it done. I think the other thing would to try and be authentic, and also to not think like the model of the podcast of, right, got this idea for a podcast. It's going to be called The Teaching Podcast, and I'm going to invite the top 10 most followed and influential people in education on and interview them with the same 10 questions, which are, how are you today? What's your background? What do you sell? Bye-bye, right? It's like, think about authenticity. Think about whatever the industry is. I mean, education, teaching is just one example. It could be any industry. It's like, think about how it is actually content that's different in some way, or unique in some way, or authentic in some way. Because if there's all these podcasts, how is that one going to be in any way different? If it's just the same format, same guests, same, this is it, guests is the same thing, isn't it? Let's just pick the same guests. They've already been on 100 podcasts. They've been on 100.
That's really great feedback. And what if you don't go instantly viral? That's a huge one, right?
Yeah.
I think so many people have this expectation, right? Of, I've started a podcast and now I'm going to be Joe Rogan or the biggest podcast in the world. I'm an episode in, and where are the millions of downloads and millions of dollars? You know, I think everybody wants that, and it's not real. Because even the podcasts that have achieved that success, some have happened very quickly, but most of them, it's years of episodes of getting great guests, of doing really intense research, of a lot of marketing, of a lot of hard work to get to that level.
Yeah.
And then it appears like you explode overnight, but really there's years of back work.
What is the number of years? Do we know? Do we know the average number of years?
How long is a piece of string? How long is a piece of string?
Yeah.
It's the same. Yeah. I mean, there's podcasts out there that have been going for 10 years and are still steadily growing on a niche topic. For example, we have a podcast at Podbean called DNA Today with Kira Deneen, who, I mean, fantastic. If you want to know about genetics and DNA, it is the coolest podcast, right? And it's niche. It's DNA. So it's not going to be for everybody. And yet it's still steadily growing, and it's been going for 10 years, I think longer. So I think it is something where it's important to remember that. Right. And then the consistency plays into that in a way where it's important to, number one, keep showing up as much as you can, however you can, in a way that doesn't feel like you're giving too much or that you're going to burn out.
Yeah.
And we're talking about AI a lot these days. We have a lot of AI events here at Podbean. We have in the past couple of months. I'm leading a panel at Podcast Movement about AI and tools, because it's not that AI is coming for our jobs. It's what can AI do that you don't want to do? What tools, even what can you hire out? If you really hate editing, can you hire an editor? Maybe, maybe not. But it's something where that's what to start thinking about. What can I take off my plate that is draining me instead of filling up my cup? So that's a really important one as well. And I think, yeah, what you said in terms of just like keep going at it is really
And
important, and
just to tie
you'll
into
hit your
that,
stride.
there's a
Yeah.
guy called Harry Morton,
Oh,
who,
yeah.
do you know who he is?
Oh, yeah.
Oh
Harry's
yeah.
coming on in September,
Oh, right. Okay. Well,
I think.
he's pretty cool. But I don't know him, but I sort of follow him. And one of the things he said the other week was about he was talking about downloads versus actual listeners. So on Podbean dashboard, what I will always look at is the graph that shows you how many people actually listened every day rather than the downloads. That's the graph I'll always look at to see a measure of it. And actually, like when you're starting, if you have like, well, I don't know how many you'd have when you start, but let's say you have like 5 or 10. That's still like 5 or 10 real people who have listened to a portion. If John Kiernan was here, the head of content at Podbean, I would ask him on that chart how long they have to listen for to get a register. Is that literally a click, or is that
It's a minute.
It's a
It's a
minute?
minute. A download counts as a minute. I do know the answer to that.
No, but that's a download though. I'm talking about that graph that shows you how many people have actually listened a day. At the bottom of the dashboard, there's like one that says
Yep.
unique. So, right. So that's okay. They have to
Yeah,
like,
it's the same thing. Yeah. So a download technically counts as listening to a minute. And then that statistic for daily listeners is tracking the IP of the specific directory. And it's going to pull, that specific IP. So it doesn't have any personal information, but it tells you how many times that address listened to, or a specific address listened to a specific episode. So, yeah. Anyways, John, if you want to pop in here and add your insight, we would absolutely love it. But I think you're right, and there are those podcasts that we all have them where, you tune in and it's an immediate binge, right? You're like, oh, these
Mm,
are my people, and this is my personality now, and there go the next 10 hours, right? So
yeah,
I think it is important to understand that there are people out there who are going to love your show and appreciate what you do, and to find them and to keep going.
yeah. I
And
mean,
then it is going to be a slow start.
that's the biggest thing, I guess, is probably a year or two in, is sort of how to build the community, whether that be, I don't know, like a Facebook group. I mean, we haven't set one of those up, but I
Mhm.
mean, some people use Discord servers. Like one of my favorite podcasters is called Paul Reed. He does a podcast called The Old Frontline, and basically on his podcast, he has a Discord server. So he always says in his episodes, somebody messaged me on the Discord server. I don't have a Discord server. However, I sort of know what he's talking about. He's talking about a message board or something there where people can interact with each other within a community space. And sometimes I think that's difficult when you're making a podcast. It is sometimes difficult to also think, how am I going to connect the listeners of my podcast with each other? Um, and that, I guess, would be the next level once you've set it up and you've actually established it a little bit, to think, how am I going to do that side of it? Um,
Yeah.
that's me posing a question I don't have an answer to.
I think it's something where, when you're looking at how to, do everything, because people think, okay, a podcast is a show. It's
Mhm.
really more than that, right? It's
Yeah.
the marketing, it's the guests, it's
Yeah.
the booking the guests, it's the creating the questions, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's one of those things where, as an independent medium, you're going to learn as you go, and you're going to learn as you do and learn as you go.
Yeah.
And that's really important in terms of figuring out what you like, what you don't like, what you can outsource, what you're not an expert in, what you actually have an amazing natural affinity toward. And I think it's different for every podcaster. And that's why, we always talk about tools in our events, right? And on the podcast, on Podcasting Smarter, because there are going to be certain tools for certain people where it's like, oh my gosh, this just took, this lifted my workload by 40%, right? And so it's going to be different for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as I said, the next level maybe for us would be to look at, how to really connect with the listeners in a more meaningful way than just a comment on social media. Even though, to be fair, a comment on social media about an episode gives me more of a buzz. One comment on an episode gives me more buzz than a load of downloads. That's wrong, because those people have probably actually listened to it. But seeing someone actually speak to you about it, it just gives you a bit of a buzz, doesn't it? It's like, I'm not just
Yeah,
speaking.
you get that direct feedback, absolutely. And there are lots of ways that podcasts can solicit that, whether it's through the Podbean app where people can, comment on your episodes, whether it's asking for a rating or review on a different directory like Apple Podcasts, something like that, whether it's soliciting feedback, asking for
Yeah,
feedback in your email newsletter, whether it's, getting those comments on social media. And, one of the top tips that we actually have to share. And I know that you guys do this, but when you get a comment on social media, reply to it. Right?
yeah,
That's in terms of building your community. There's all these little things where attention is currency. And so I think that building your community, and I'm not specifically speaking about TTR right now, Teachers
yeah.
Talk Radio, but in terms of overall for podcasters out there, when you're thinking about building your community, you have to try different avenues. And then wherever you start to get that interaction, you build it, you grow on it, you feed it, you foster it, and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So it definitely is. And it's going to be different for every podcast. Some podcasts do really well on one social media platform, some on another. Some are like, hey, we're not doing social media. We are an email newsletter kind of marketing show. So it really depends on the subject matter, your host, what you have, and ding, ding, ding to John Kiernan, our director of content, what you have personal bandwidth for. That is his catchphrase, personal bandwidth. So for everybody out there, it is one of our favorites here at Podbean. And I want to ask you next, in terms of managing your time, because you do so much between teaching, right? Teachers Talk Radio. How do you manage your time? And, what does that look like for you?
Well, I am part-time, which helps. Because if I wasn't, I don't think I'd be able to do it in the way that I have. So, I mean, managing time outside of that would be, well, when you've been a teacher, right, and you've been full time as a classroom teacher, managing
Yeah.
time becomes easier because you go, hang on, I've actually got a bit of time to do this. I've not got no time. I've got a bit of time. I do think like you have to be efficient with, like, I think one of the things that I've learned to do from complete novice would be like when it comes to podcast editing, for example, being able to do that quite quickly, to manage the time in that way, to not to look for perfection in the edit, but just to look for like, let's make sure this is good to go, right? Because sometimes, like with the volume of content we produce, if I did that for everyone, there's no way I'd be able to do it. And the same goes to the other guys who sort of help us with the editing and stuff. So I think managing the job list effectively, prioritizing things, I think that socials is just so like it's just so important. Like it is the important thing is to keep, because the thing is like it is easy to sort of go, oh, I produce a podcast, and then you think that the podcast is the product, but if no one's listening to it, then it's a hobby, isn't it? It's just a hobby. It's just I'm recording in a room, putting it out there, and I'm doing it every week, and I've got
Yeah.
Nigel and his dog down the road who listen to it, and that's it. But I'm going to keep doing it because I enjoy it, and that's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
But if it's just
Yeah.
a hobby, like you've got to actually do it on socials. Like
Yeah.
socials is part
No,
of
it's so you're so right. And I think it's something where everybody out there feels, there is an element of feeling cringe when you promote your own
there
creative
is.
endeavors.
There is.
And I'm just going to put it out there. And I know you know this, Tom, but everybody feels this way. It is normal. It's okay. That's how it is until it isn't. Right. And so it's just
Yeah.
one of those things where, you have to push through the cringe because there's no way around it. You're just going to
No,
have to do it.
I mean, my domain is education. I'm one of the biggest sort of
Which
content
is,
one of the biggest content creators in education is a guy called Lee Parkinson, Mr. P, ICT. And one of the things I admire about him is he just puts out content. He doesn't care. He'll put out video content every day of him talking to camera or him doing whatever he's doing. And, it entertains people. It's funny. But the biggest thing I admire about him is, number one, the amount of stuff he does. But number two, and even more than that, he puts himself out there.
yeah.
And that is difficult to do.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, if you have a media product, like on some level, you've got to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to push through the cringe, and just know, for everybody out there who's watching live, watching the replay, anything like that, everybody feels that way, almost everybody. So
Mhm.
it's definitely something that is a common experience, and it can be really vulnerable, or like, you're tooting your own horn, or, maybe, you feel like you have a big ego or something. But no, you made something and you're telling people about it. And that's really important, because how else are they going to find out otherwise? So I think that that's a really important aspect as
Or
well.
or you could just go on LinkedIn and every single day saying, I am delighted to announce that I have just opened my LinkedIn again to start the day off. Nothing's actually happened. just on LinkedIn.
Oh, no, I love it. I love it. LinkedIn, it's actually a great place to share podcast episodes and updates. And
It is.
I think
I was
at this
I was
point,
being sarcastic.
no, but it's true. I think for me, because obviously, I'm with Podbean, my entire LinkedIn feed is podcast industry. So it's really wild. You had mentioned Harry Morton before, and I also see those updates on LinkedIn about,
Yeah.
what are the difference between a download and a daily listener, and how do you monetize or think about monetizing, versus downloads? It's like, what's the ROI, what's the return on investment, all those kind of things. So there's a lot of really amazing content on LinkedIn. Obviously, we're posting at Podbean a lot.
Yeah.
So that's really cool as well. I want to ask you next, we've only got a couple of minutes left, but I wanted to ask you about, where you see the future of educational podcasting evolving in the next couple of years. And obviously, having gotten your hands in the soil with Teachers Talk Radio, and just that firsthand experience, how you've seen the industry of independent media for education evolve since maybe even the pandemic.
I mean, it's going to continue to grow, isn't it? I think that's obvious. I mean, the number of
Yeah.
new podcasts and ventures out there is still growing. In terms of how it's going to evolve when it comes to the content, I don't think there's necessarily going to be a change in that, because I think there's always going to be a desire for the things that education podcasters are talking about. Teaching, yes, it changes and evolves, but teaching is teaching, right? So there's always going to be that market there for teachers and teaching. So in terms of evolution, the only thing I'm sure of is it will continue to grow. Anything else, I'm pretty much just speculating. I have no idea. I think AI is obviously going to play a role in everything that's
Of
going to happen
course.
in the podcasting world in general. But like, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things pan out.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'd love for you to share maybe a memorable moment or some of the best feedback you've gotten from the community you've created on the impact uh, that they've experienced from Teachers Talk Radio.
I mean, memorable moment wise, probably some of the interviews I've done. Like I've done a few interviews with Catherine Singh. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she's, sort of, I guess, talked of as the strictest head teacher in Britain. And the interviews with her are always interesting, always very, very interesting. She says a lot of really interesting things, and that then makes people sort of, well, let's be honest, some people either hate it or love it. So, like you get that was really good to hear, to interview her. Such an interesting character. Other moments or highlights, I think, interviewing the Shadow Education Secretary in the UK, Bridget Phillipson, who, I really enjoyed sort of interviewing her. Somebody who's now the Education Secretary in the UK after the Labour election win. So being able to interview somebody who works in politics, who is at the top of their game in politics. And, when I started this in my bedroom in February 2021, I didn't think that I'd interview Bridget Phillipson. I didn't. I'd be lucky to interview anybody. So, that took a lot of emails, to be fair, to get
Yeah.
to interview Bridget Phillipson. But like, I think those would be the moments where I'm like, yeah, this is cool. This is actually cool. I think in terms of feedback, when people really enjoy a show, I mean, this is for me personally. Other hosts will have had their own things. This is just for me and my shows, because that's the feedback I'm going to get from my shows. having people DM you and say, "Oh, that was great," or "That was funny," or "That was interesting," or "Oh, that was really good." Those things genuinely, like they're just little comments on DMs, but they are what makes you, that just gives you a buzz, doesn't it? It's like if you do
Yeah.
anything creative and somebody gives you good feedback, that makes a massive difference to you and the way you feel about that creative endeavor, whatever that is. Because it's all about perception, isn't it? With creative endeavors, there's no like right or wrong. It's like if so to get somebody say they like it is pretty cool.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think to, interview people who are at the top of policy making in your industry, that's huge. So everybody from,
Yeah,
that top policy making down in terms of governance to, hey, I really liked your show and it made a difference in my classroom, or here was the impact with
correct.
the students I serve, or things like that, I think is amazing from a practical standpoint. Well, Tom, it's just been a pleasure. You did ask me a question earlier, so I want to talk about favorite podcasts. What are yours? Let's start.
Okay, so I obviously with podcasts you have limited time to listen to them all, so
Sure.
there can only be a few. So obviously Teachers Talk Radio, I listen to every show on Teachers Talk Radio, or the vast majority, because it's a massive network. But outside of Teachers Talk Radio, The Old Front
Mhm.
Line by Paul Reed is a World War
Mhm.
One podcast. I listen to that.
Mhm.
That is just him. He has the odd guests, but usually it's just him and it's very niche, but he's such a nice guy. Do you know what makes a difference when someone's just such a nice guy? Like he's such
Yeah.
a nice guy that you're just like, I just talk to me, Paul, on your podcast because you're just a nice guy. But his level of expertise is like ridiculous. So that on World War One stuff. So he would be one. I like the rest is football with Gary Lineker, and so that's a podcast that I'm into my sports. So as a football podcast, that would be one that I listen to quite a bit. And the rest is politics sometimes as well. Just trying to think beyond that. There are others I'm probably forgetting. But well, there'll be lots. But I'd say there's two, plus Teachers
Mhm.
Talk Radio. And then actually beyond that, it might be the odd episode of a lot because I don't have time to religiously follow more than that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, that's a lot. I mean, and you had asked me what my favorites are. I do have to say I'm pretty boring. Everybody asks me this, but I listen to a lot of individual episodes and
Yeah,
shows as part of for our events here at Podbean and as part of my role
yeah,
with Podbean. Um, and I would say, obviously podcasting smarter and a lot of industry podcasts. Pod News has a podcast that's really big. We love. But also, for me, it's going to be the New York Times, the Daily. It's going to be Fresh Air. I also love ologies. I'm a bit of a nerd, Radio Lab, all that kind of stuff. So, DNA Today with DNA Today with Kira Deneen, a lot of science I really find
yeah,
fascinating.
yeah, yeah.
And storytelling, I think for me are the big ones. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I like sort of ASMR stuff. So Clara, who was actually a
Oh,
guest
yeah.
on this, I like Clara's podcast.
Yeah.
I listen to that sometimes.
I do too. I do as well. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I do
no,
also love meditation, sleep podcasts,
yeah,
ASMR. Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I think I'm one of those people where when I find one episode I like, I just play that episode like 200 times to go to
yeah.
sleep. So
And
I
within
think it's,
education, there's a lot of obviously great podcasts out in education.
yeah,
I could list probably about 50 now, but there's a lot of education podcasts
heaps.
doing really great things. The Dynamic Deputies, I think, is one that I've listened to a few times, which is really good. Teacher Toolkit's podcast, Mr. PICT's podcast, Adam Boxer has a podcast. It's really, there's probably like
Yeah.
probably
No, absolutely.
100 I could list.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Tom, it has been such a pleasure. I'm going to read our brief outro and then we will wrap up. Thank you, everyone, for joining us at Podcasting Smarter for our August live event, Podcasting Success, a back to school special with Teachers Talk Radio, featuring Tom from Teachers Talk Radio. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, Podcasting Smarter has live stream sessions like this one with top podcasters and industry experts. We also have exclusive recorded episodes on the Podcasting Smarter podcast, so make sure to check that out. And this is just one of our live events. We've got some really fun opportunities for you to join our community coming up in September. And if you joined late or want to have another listen to this conversation, you can replay this live stream on Podbean's YouTube channel, the Podcasting Smarter podcast. And we are brought to you by Podbean. Of course, we're a podcast hosting and monetizing platform and home to over 640,000 podcasts. To start your podcast, head over to podbean.com today. And of course, if you have any questions, you can always email us at podcastingsmarter@podbean.com. That's podcastingsmarter@podbean.com. Thanks for joining us, and stay tuned for more podcasting tips and best practices. Happy podcasting, everybody. Thanks, Tom.